Hello, welcome everyone to my review of Björk's 10th studio album, Fossora. I should probably call this episode Sonic Symbolism as a nod to anyone who's been listening to Björk's new podcast that has been covering all of the albums in her discography, diving into them, the making of it, the symbolism, the ideas that came forth and the inspirations. It has been a really fascinating listen, and I felt like I should preface this video by saying I've been really enjoying kind of rediscovering her past albums in a new light, really getting to look beneath the sort of surface of how these albums were created. And I'm very much looking forward to the Fossora episode, which will be probably coming in a few weeks when she catches up with it, her current new project. But I'm going to do my best here to sort of pluck any sort of meaning or inspiration from my own sort of understanding of this body of work. Of course, also with some of the press and interviews that she has done. I haven't seen all of them, but I've read some. And give you my thoughts on her 10th studio record. It's finally here, 5 years after her last, Utopia. We got the announcement at the end of August, only about a month away from the release of the record. And we had the lead single, A Topos, at the end of the month. And I have reviewed not only A Topos on this channel, but also the second and third singles that were released in the subsequent weeks, Ovule and Ancestress. And I will link those reviews in the description. And for the sake of brevity, I may not spend quite so long talking about those songs again in this video. I apologize, but it does, it's down there if you'd be interested to hear a little bit more of an expanded thought and analysis on those songs from me. But we've still got a ton of new tracks to talk about here today. And I'm just, I'm in awe. I mean, the period after a new Björk release, it's sort of like, it's just processing and absorbing. It's like, I don't want to rush into this review. I want to make sure that not only have I done some of my research, but I also want to make sure that I've really allowed some of these songs to be processed properly. Because as you know, Björk is not an artist that, obviously is very accessible for the immediate listener and one who is not so familiar with them. And the songs are songs that tend to grow on you rather than instantaneously hook you with a catchy melody or, a progression or chord or beat structure that is something we're familiar with. She likes to really experiment, push the envelope, kind of taunt the listener with uncanny sort of rhythm sequences and melodies that, to some people might not be their cup of tea. But if you're a longtime Björk listener, you kind of know what you're in for. And I am a longtime Björk listener at this point. I've been engaging with her, listening to her for over 10 years now. Granted, most of her fans have been almost 30 years now listening to her music. I wish I could say I was one of the earlier fans, but I was sleeping on her for far too long. But this record, the fact that it is her 10th studio album and it comes nearly 30 years after her debut. I don't want to say it's full circle in that regard sonically, because we are so far on another planet from where she was in the 90s when she started out, which was a lot more in the pop sphere. And I don't anticipate Björk ever returning back to that, that is just so far gone from where she is blasted off into. Pushing the envelope and doing the avant-garde, that is always going to be her MO for the foreseeable, for the rest of her career. But she still, even though, it's going to be a weird project, it's also going to be something you can never expect or anticipate. And looking at the concept for this record, the biggest summarization she has given us, rather humorously, is that this is her mushroom album. Her fungus period has been quite bubbly, which is one of my favorite quotes I think I've ever heard, particularly from Björk herself in that little Pitchfork kind of ad interview video they put out for this album. Björk was really inspired by the mushroom and fungus kingdom, the mycelium kingdom, or as their scientific name would call them. And she really took inspiration from, of course, the pandemic. I'll be honest with you, I'm really tired about hearing artists talk about the pandemic and COVID-19. It's been 2 years now, and it's just like, I get it. Like, you haven't released a body of work since that time, so of course that's probably going to play a part in the inspiration and songwriting. But it's getting a little old to me now, the whole concept of lockdown and how it inspired my new body of work. I'm just like, of course it did. And I'm not, it's just, I'm ready to move on. But to be that as it may, I mean, Björk hasn't released an album in 5 years. A lot of this record was composed in 2020. And so she really, became sort of fascinated with the fact that we were all bunkering down into our homes and having to be, a lot more rooted and grounded in one place, perhaps, than we might have otherwise been. Something at the end of Fossora, she says, "At last we stayed in one place long enough," so deliciously at the end of that song. And that's the overarching theme. And then, of course, the exploration that comes with that. So it's an inward, internally looking record. Pretty common fare for Björk in her discography, I would say. But, I would say this is definitely a more introspective record. I think Utopia was pretty introspective, but there were some blends of extroversion coming out. And I think Vulnicura was actually quite an extroverted record. Some people may disagree with me on that. Most of her more recent albums, I would say, are quite navel-gazing. They're quite introspective. Her more extroverted records would have been Homogenic and Post and Debut. Since then, it's been a completely different sort of less, commercialized, look at me, look, I'm a pop star kind of energy. It's very poetic. It's all about processing emotion and healing and heartbreak and sorrow and melancholia. These are themes I expect to hear for the rest of any artist like Björk's career. I'm kind of like, I am interested in it, but I'm almost more interested in the artistic way the songs are constructed than I am, and also just the beautiful wordcraft that she comes up with. There's very uncanny sort of, combinations of syllables and rhyme schemes that it just really kind of lends the ear to be a little bit more engaged than it might otherwise be with some more obtuse lyricism. But all of that being said, synchronize my thoughts here, Fossora is a real sonic treat, okay? Lyricism aside, this is probably the album I am the most interested in sonically that I have felt that way about since Biophilia, which was over a decade ago. It's a little bit of an unpopular opinion of mine, but I was not such a huge fan of Arca's production with Björk on the last two records. I love Arca as an artist, and I definitely can appreciate the artistry. But Arca with Björk, it felt a little bit like it's run its course. And I'm glad, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of glad that Arca is not involved with this project. Because it's just hearing different influences of sound and beats and stuff again. If anything, as much as this is nothing like what she's ever done before, it's so much harkening back to sounds from her earlier records that it's like a homecoming for me in some ways, in which that Vulnicura and Utopia I felt were trying so hard to really veer off into territory we'd never heard her in before. And now especially Utopia, actually. Not so much Vulnicura, the strings, that was very homogenic, and the beats. But, Utopia, Vulnicura was all about strings. Utopia was all about flutes and, lighter woodwind, treble woodwind instruments. And this time she's going into the bass clef with the woodwind instruments. She is doing the clarinets, particularly the bass clarinets, as well as oboes. And this album is filled with them, as well as, of course, electronic production that is very gritty, but at once so organic in only a way that Björk can conjure. And she has partnered with an Indonesian gabber beat producer, musician named Kasamin. Kasamin is over a feature on many of these tracks, including the lead single, A Topos. And so the propulsive, industrial, almost mechanical, unrelenting backbone beats of these songs when they crescendo, when they get really fast-paced and in their sort of rave moment. Björk wanted this album to have introspective, inner kind of Vespertine-esque production, and yet and introspection, but at the same time, she wanted it to be a party in your bedroom. So it's a rave in parts, and then it sparsens out, and becomes very visceral, and then it explodes again. And I think this dichotomy is so wonderfully paced throughout the record. I think this album is a much better sort of flow of a record than I think an album like Utopia, which I felt like the track listing was a little bit all over the place in terms of, you know, we had a lot of kind of drawn out, kind of similar sounding songs, and then it would get very up tempo, and then it's just, this album it just feels more cohesive sonically, you know, and the fact that Casamin is sort of just sprinkled throughout, and then the slower songs are also just evenly sprinkled throughout, and we go back and forth. It just flows so well, and the sonic palette feels so unified. We have a lot of her sort of, and to me, this is, again, I say this in the Atopos review, in the Ovule review, what I think of as very medulla-like vocals from her. These sort of sampled keyboard synth samplings of her vocals that she uses to harmonize with herself as a wall of choir, especially on tracks like Ovule or on tracks like Victimhood and on Fossora and others. These tracks, and on Mycelia, which, I mean, oh my gosh, I mean, I'm about to go through the track listing here, but I just feel like I have so much I need to get through. The sonic palette is so well constructed this time around. I just really feel the influence. I feel the imagery. The album art is giving everything. Talk about sonic symbolism. So, you know, the album art, and I think she always does a really good job with this, but because, you know, it's going to be fabulously styled and very, you know, effortlessly ethereal, and over the top, and especially in the costuming department and the makeup. And it is exquisite. You know, James Mary, once again, is helming the photography here, and the styling is done impeccably. But this Alice in Wonderland, Tim Burton fungus world is just so evoked in the way that the instrumentals conjure up the sonic melodies and soundscapes. Fossora as an album title is, I think, a wonderful sort of allusion to, as she talks about, the Latin word fossore, which means to dig. It's where the words fossil comes from. And so Fossora is a feminized version of this. And so the, you know, creature, if this album was a person, is this, you know, is this creature with a fossorial claw, digging ever deeper into the earth, kind of seeking warmth and resonance and healing from trauma, but also as a way to connect, because as she sings in the opener, Atopos, so aptly, you know, the greatest way to connect is to stop fighting about superficial stuff. Take root and let your mycelia expand, your muscle of hope expand outwards, so that you can grow outwards towards love instead of inwards towards destruction, as she points out in the lyrics. And this album really is sort of like the slow kind of descent into the microcosm of personal growth that at least Björk personally had to, you know, undergo during the lockdown period. And also just the period of her life, which is also a period of time post her mother's death. Her mother died in 2018, and there are 2 songs that deal heavily with the loss of her mother. So, with that being said, I've already talked about Atopos quite at length in my review of that song, so I am going to sort of just leave that there. I will say I'm a big fan of it. At first, you know, my ears were certainly like, okay, you know, only Björk can get away with this. Only Björk can get away with this noise with a Z. But it's so fitting for the opener of the record. I can't, you know, can't slight it. I really can't. And then for Ovule, which is this sort of elegiac, you know, recitation of poetic love and sensual exploration, that is very anthemic. And then we get into a new song that I really love called Mycelia, which has no lyrics. And it could have opened the album, but I kind of appreciate that it didn't. It's earlier on, as it should be. And the amount of fun she must have had just using this keyboard that's been sampled, that's been programmed with all of these vocal samples and pitch-corrected vocals of hers. It is quite humorous. I mean, there's a lightness to it because, you know, it's these like these very short, you know, kind of humorous vocalizations that become a choir and become a symphony. And it is a brilliant, only kind of Björkian way of creating a symphonic, crescendo of sound. And it really does find its footing melodically in a way that I think is quite satisfying. It feels like the harmonizations and vocalizations of elemental, small plants and fungus, fungi and mushrooms. It's like the mushroom kingdom has come to life, to be as cheesy as that. But I can't get enough of it. I could have listened to this song, if it was even longer. I could have gotten so much more out of this. We lead into Sorrowful Soil, which is the a cappella song on the record. I think her going a cappella so far off of Medulla, which was her, largely a cappella record 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now. Oh my gosh, time is moving so fast. The presence and poignance of the lyrics obviously take center stage here. Melodically, it is definitely a song I do want a little bit more from. And of course, with Björk, I give her a lot of benefit of the doubt there. It's, I know that I'm not going to get a traditional soaring, melody that finds its footing very easily. I know that it's going to be a bit more of a free-for-all in that department. That's going to break all of the rules, and that's what it does. But, the choir and the essence of emotion and the lyricism add all of this weight to a song that could otherwise be quite flimsy melodically. Our roots are dug into sorrowful soil. In a woman's lifetime, she gets 400 eggs, but only 2 or 3 nests, woven with a mother's life force, emotional textile, self-sacrificial. This is emotional textile, self-sacrificial. Nihilism happening cuts through this. You did well, you did your best. You did well. And that's sort of repeated in like a, mantra at the end of the song. This is a just solemn, tribute to her mother and everything that she has left behind for her. Her inspirations, obviously the literal sort of biological kind of symbolism with the eggs. A woman does produce tons and hundreds of eggs, but only a few of them will ever fertilize and fully become, fetuses. So it's sort of symbolic of a seed or tons of seeds kind of being spread by nature, and they're not all going to bear fruit, but in the sort of overabundance of planting, which Björk is all about, abundance of feeling, abundance of unencumbered experience. Not all of it's going to go to a nice place. Not all of it's going to lead to life, but in the abundance of it, you're guaranteed to find something truly special. And so that's a wonderful metaphor for human life and a mother and daughter's connection. So we weave this emotional textile. There's a lot of allusions in Ancestress as well to, again, this sort of idea of a beaded cord. She sings about this on Hollow in Biophilia. So I do think that, she was singing about this already, like long before this song, but just re-exploring sort of the way that ancestry, kind of the lineage of it, the spiritual lineage that comes through your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother's mother. And of course, there's a very matriarchal slant to all of this. But the divine feminine kind of energy is something Björk is always going to unabashedly sort of exude. She doesn't have to be always in your face about it, but in the lyrics, but you can just tell that it's not exclusive. It's not excluding men from the conversation. It's just, it's focusing on feminine energy, and someone who studies queer, is invested in queer studies, will easily understand this. It's not necessarily like down with all men, it's the feminine energy, which tends to manifest more through women, but it can through men as well, is what's really holding all of this together. And what Björk is celebrating in all of her songs. And it also self-sacrifices, sort of alluding to the fact that women often make the greatest sacrifices for their children. And it's sort of this tragic story. And the tragedy, of course, continues with Ancestress, but there's a lighter mood to it because of the, percussion and the sort of almost, you know, gaiety that she has in some of the delivery. It's like very major chord instead of minor in parts of the song. And that kind of counterbalances the heaviness of the lyrical content. And again, I won't spend too long talking about Ancestress. I will link my review of it where I go a little bit more into the lyrics, but it is very biographical about her mother's experience, you know, from being a young mother raising Björk to watching her, you know, in the hospital and having to ultimately unplug the machine that was keeping her alive. So it's a very difficult sort of thing to process and grieve, and she wanted to kind of pay tribute to that. And the music video is just, you know, this perfect sort of pagan representation of an outdoor funeral with this Viking kind of inspiration that it just, oh, it's so chef's kiss. We move on to Fjord i Fjordum. I definitely butchered that pronunciation. I am sorry. The title translates to How Beautiful It Is in the Fjords. This was a poem that was written in the 18th century by Björk Einar's daughter. And it's a traditional Icelandic folk song that I guess many Icelanders know. So, you know, if you're from there, it's like them singing, you know, Amazing Grace. It's like her putting Amazing Grace on the record. Apparently the woman who originally wrote this poem was believed to cast spells on those who crossed her, and her poems had these mystical sort of powers to them. And she was a fisherwoman. So yeah, it's a wonderful patriotic nod for her. Obviously it's a 1 minute long song. And you know, there's not a lot more I can say because it's not really her creation. Even though I assume that it's not hers lyrically. I'm assuming maybe the melody is one that she came up with herself. And so if the melody, and I haven't looked too deep into this, if anyone knows if the melody is the same melody from the actual traditional song, or if she's just taking the lyrics, be interested to know. But it's my least favorite track on the record because it's sort of, you know, inconsequential in the grand scheme of the record. You know, it's a nice interlude. Moving on, we have Victimhood. I think it's the longest song on the record. From the beginning, this song definitely has, I think a lot of her records have what I call these journey songs, and they're longer songs, close to 10 minutes. Volmacura had Black Lake. Utopia had Body Memory. Fossora has Victimhood. And it's not just the length of the song, but it's sort of the episodic nature of the soundscapes you move through in it. This song starts out with the deepest, most, I think, in my opinion, sexy bass clarinet sort of reverbed out sonic soundscapes that you can imagine. It is extremely haunting sonically to hear these bellowing, deep, bottomed out bass clarinets distorted. As she, you know, sort of precariously begins the melody line. And then there's this metronome-like beat that picks up, which adds sort of extra groove to it. The song really starts to add layers as we progress. And I'll be honest with you, as the layers start to add, I do tend to sonically drop out a little bit. The melody starts to become kind of indistinguishable, and it's only in the moments where she sort of focuses in again sonically. That's when I feel a sense of place in the song before it starts to get a little bit cacophonous. And I understand that that's to come with Björk's music, but it's not something I'm particularly fond of, but I do appreciate because we do have some amazing, you know, sonic kind of production things going on here. Victimhood, I heed the call to step out of victimhood, has a saintly glow, holier than thou. It erased my shadow. Our bird's eye view can help me transcend this archetype. Our bird's eye view can help me transgress out of this hole. Who am I that this has happened to transgress us beyond our tragedy? Took one for the team. I sacrificed myself to save us. I rejected myself, sacrificed myself. I felt sorry for myself. To transgress us out of this tragedy, victimhood, I heed a call out. I mean, this is a somber, sober meditation on looking at one's life and processing trauma and grief. And Jamie Lee Curtis, what is this album about? Trauma. Yes. You know, it's so painful how, I mean, it's so resonant how much I relate to, you know, who am I that this has happened to? Rejection, it left a void that is never satisfied, sunk into victimhood, felt the world owed me love. I mean, it is a position that it's so easy to get entrenched in mentally. And you can really feel, you know, sort of Björk struggling out of this sort of dark cavern. If, you know, the sonic soundscape is metaphorically representing the sort of depression that she's almost experiencing. Because victimhood is such a depressing force on the psyche. It really, you know, it's a tricky thing because sometimes there's what one would understand is a very, you know, a reasonable and is deserved, you know, feeling of victimhood that, you know, it's easy to embrace in our lives. But to shake that off, no matter what happens to us, and transcend above that, to say that, you know, I may, you know, think that I'm the victim here, but that's just always going to put me in this hole that I'm feeling, you know, trampled in. And it's lowering me, my self-worth and everything about me down to the point where I'm, you know, subjected to the powers of the universe constantly. You know, it takes years and years of constructing your thought processes to sort of get out of that muck. And it's easier said than done. And it is work that I am still very much heavily dealing with. I mean, if I relate this to rejection, as she mentions in parts of the song, it's like, in my dating experiences, in my search for love, I just want to wear victimhood like a crown because I'm eternally the victim here. It feels like I am almost, there's one instance I can think of off the top of my head where I wasn't the victim, where I might have done something wrong and caused that relationship to fumble. But in almost every other instance, it's like the universe has just been like, no. Make sure Arthur does not end up well out of any of this. Make sure Arthur gets screwed over. It really is easy to just buy into that. It's an alluring sort of kind of, you know, blanket to wrap yourself in, but it will not save you from your own depressive kind of mentality. It won't protect you the way it seems like it would. It is a falsehood. It is a, you know, belittling force. And at the end of the day, you need to erupt out and get a bird's eye view. Perspective will, you know, sometimes from an outsider, sometimes from a third party, or just if you can sort of meditate and divorce yourself from sort of this me versus them mentality and look at it from a higher perspective, you start to see what really matters and what doesn't. And you start to see the positives that have been hidden from you for so long. Because if you stay in victimhood, you're not seeing any positives. You're seeing positives go to other people and not you. And then that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I like to believe it is anyway. You receive what you give out. So if you're in a victim curled up, everything's hurting me stance, then the universe is going to eventually sort of follow suit. But it's not something that I like to beat people over the head about when they're in the dumps, because it's sort of like, get yourself out of your bootstraps mentality that I find to be so abrasive when someone's at their lowest. You need to be sympathetic. Some people, it is like, gosh, I mean, they are a victim. Like, you reasonably need to look at this scenario and say they are a victim here. But they're more than being a victim. In that instance, you pick them up out of it and you rectify it how you can. But wonderful, wonderful meditation on this here from Björk. Sonically, love the intro, love the sort of moments where it sparsens out. Some of it also gets a little muddy for me, but hey, that's the muddy soil that we're dealing with here. It's a little bit cacophonous and muddied. But we move into Allow, which is perhaps the most blissed out Björk song I might have ever heard. And this is coming from someone who loves Vespertine. Now, I definitely feel like Allow may have been a song from the Utopia era because of the fact that the flutes, it's the only time they're introduced on this record. It's the only time this song does kind of stand out in that regard because of it. She pairs with this other female vocalist, Emily Nicholas, wonderfully. We don't actually hear Björk sing with female vocalists almost ever. unless it's a choir. And so I believe this might have been actually one of the first times we got some female vocalists just, solo kind of pairing with her. We've gotten, I need to be careful here when I say male vocalists. At the time, male vocalists. Anoni is female now. So I can't, I'm just saying when Volta was recorded, it sounds like a male vocal. Please forgive me. I'm just being objective here. But yeah, they are so mellifluous together. And just as I thought, I'm reading on Genius, this song was from that era. She wrote it with Arca. Didn't end up getting on the record, but it fits with this new one. Allow it to happen. Allow it to grow. I look up at the treetops and I will braid those twigs together, create a cathedral ceiling above me. How I long to float at midair between the branches. I mean, this is so euphoric and unabashedly positive. And for Björk in her recent catalog, it almost is like where's the catch? This is so, transcendent. And we haven't, again, Utopia even lyrically didn't quite go this, I don't know, this open-chested. And somewhat simplistic with the lyricism to a certain degree. It's lighter on lyrics and it's a lot more just on repetitive sort of phrasing and breathiness and like just feeling the flutes and the harmonizations coming together. But it is a gorgeous piece of music, and it is one that it gives me sort of seaside feeling, the sort of fresh Scandinavian air kind of on a partly cloudy day, like bristling against, the pine forests on the beaches. I just get this very kind of Scandinavian forest beach feel. Like it's a perfect, I don't know, like a 60-degree brisk day, the light breeze and sun scattering through the clouds. It's my idea of heaven. It's my idea of heaven. So I don't know. I'm transported there. It's an out-of-body experience. What can I say? Well, then we move on to Fungal City, and we have another vocalist here, Serpent with Feet, who is a R&B singer / rapper. And I actually, thankfully, I familiarized myself with him recently, which was, good because he has some amazing work that I've, his 2021 album, Deacon, I highly recommend. And he is LGBT. He is a gay man. Fungal City, though, I gotta be honest with you, I think sonically it's probably my least favorite song on the record. It's similar in sound to Fossora, but it's not as interesting melodically. And of course, it doesn't have that amazing rave outro. I feel this song gives me Courtship vibes. And, Courtship is a song on Utopia that I also feel is a little bit, let's just put it this way, the melody isn't there. The melody is not there. The melody isn't even considered. And there's also a lot of discordant instrumental. The clarinets don't really try and harmonize at all with Björk's vocals. There are moments where they do. That's sort of the piece of the puzzle, is that she'll always land on that harmony at one point, but then it'll go in a completely different direction. And it's just a lot of sound. But it's upbeat and it definitely gives fungus energy. Fungal City, subterranean, curve the forest floor. We walk on this sunken mystery, trunks bursting through the moss from our love. It's so unapologetically like hippie forest energy, right? It's kind of funny, Björk always talks about how she doesn't want to be regarded as this ethereal fairy. But I feel like on this record, she's the most unapologetically kind of witchy forest hippie woman that she's ever been with her lyrics, at least in recent times, that I appreciate because it's got no pretense of, yes, there's some scientific words thrown in there kind of, in strange ways, but in such a satisfying way. But this record is a very kind of blissed out in the lyrical department, especially in the latter half of it. His capacity for love is enormous, and they both just sort of expound on that harmonically. And of course, there's sexual undertones, there's scientific undertones, just yeah, spiritual. It's just a wonderful metaphorical song for, the forest floor and how alive it is and how roots intersect with each other and all of the, neural kind of fiber networks that expand out from from mycelia in particular, from fungus and mushrooms, how they send electronic pulses to each other. If anyone's seen Avatar, sort of like that. I get that imagery as well. But yeah, it's not my favorite song. Trolagaba is the other instrumental. Mycelia is the kind of blissed out, sort of more proper, kind of avant-garde instrumental here. Trolagaba is just letting loose and having fun. Troll is, trolla comes from troll, and gaba is also Icelandic for hoax or trick. And so it fits also the fact that gaba is the name for gabber, a musical subgenre of hardcore techno that comes through in Castaman's music. It fit like a glove for her to pair these two words together. And so we get the most, eclectic, industrial kind of techno beat dizzying fest of what I can only describe in this. If you hadn't thought of this record before, you'd think I'm crazy as fungus rave music, but it fits so perfectly when you listen to it. It is, it's somewhat ominous, and I do appreciate the ominous nature that comes through, because the uncanny beats, the uncanny sound and oral atmosphere is very natural. I feel nature is sort of arcane in that way. It is light and springy and like staccato and fun and vibrant and bandy, but it's also, wailing and stolid and also austere and mysterious and foggy and all of these things. And she just encapsulates it all with all of this in such a wonderful cornucopia. Free Fall. Free Fall is just her and strings. And dare I say, perhaps one of the more classic melody inspired songs and ballads she's had since Vespertine, or at least since Medulla, or maybe even Biophilia, because I forget, Solstice had a very strong melody, and so did Moon. But since that time, she has definitely not tried to give us a, more kind of melodic ballad. And Free Fall is what I've been wanting for so long, for at least a decade from her. Free Fall is perhaps also one of her most accessible songs on the record. I feel like it's the most sort of classically song on the record. Like, I almost feel like I get parallels to that early 1993 ballad, Like Someone in Love, which is just an unapologetic, 1960s Hollywood love song kind of thing. I let myself free fall into your arms, into the shape of the love we created, our emotional hammock, safe inside the fabric of our love-woven membrane. Every time we kiss, share songs and films, hike mountains and beaches, our joined presence gains form, our affections captured in a structure, visceral sculpting of our love into a space. I just love the way she can metamorphosize, metaphorically expand upon, the act of lovemaking in a way that's just so painterly and visual, so 3D, and primordial, and yet mix it with anecdotal, what we do on our dates. We watch movies and we go on hikes, and, Free Fall is, again, carrying on that sort of blissed out energy. This is when she is in a comfortable place in a relationship, and it's something we all long for. As we get into the outro, the staccato change up of the strings, I think, is a wonderful sort of backbone for these, wailings, illuminating our love, our solar systems coalescing, softly surrendering into itself. A gentle meeting of gas and dust amalgamating. Arctic Persian compassionate. I don't know what that means, because we're dealing with cosmology here, and it's interesting. It's very biophilia, taking scientific processes, especially macrocosmic ones or microcosmic ones, and relating them to a relationship. It's so what biophilia was about. And again, what record does this album remind me the most of? I'm getting Vespertine, Medulla, Biophilia, and a bit of Utopia. All of them, maybe even some post and some debut. It's got everything. But Freefall is a song. It is a song with a capital S. We have the title track, Fossora. Björk really has started to embrace actually having title tracks. Up until Utopia, she never did that. And, you know, at the time, I didn't know if it was necessarily a smart move. I sort of liked having the titles be their own thing. But I think this time around, it's better suited. I think Fossora is such an interesting word. And the way she sings it, Fossora, I mean, that is a wonderful way to make that word sound so much more beautiful than it already is. And this song is so joyful. I get like, you know, bubbly sort of botanist kind of energy. You know, just talking about the mycelium world, you know, it's Miss Frizzle energy in a little bit of a way. And it's also sort of mother goddess tree energy. There's spores everywhere spreading for millions of years. We've been ejecting. And then the creature, the subject of the album, is her fossorial claws digging downwards. You know, has anyone played Skyward Sword, the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword game? There's these creatures. There are these digging creatures called, I think, called the Magmas. And they're these sort of like digging, you know, they give you the magma mitts, which allow you to dig into the earth so that you can burrow and go through tunnels. And this feels like their anthem. I mean, I gotta be honest with you. It gives me that energy. I can't not think about them when I listen to this song. But when this song becomes, you know, industrial, when the beat becomes a jackhammer, basically, and just really, it's interesting because it's like in visualizing it, I see us burrowing down, and we're just sort of slowly kind of unfurling our roots, and then we hit this point where the song just like plummets. And it goes a mile a minute, and it's just breaking through the dirt. And she adopts the distorted vocal that we once heard on Pluto, which is this muffled, sort of distorted sound that on her voice, which is so reminiscent of that. So once again, homogenics coming through. At last, we stayed in one place long enough to shoot down deep hyphaea roots that penetrate concrete and plastic, even though the ground is burnt underneath monumental growth. So this is a testament to the thesis of the record, you know, what she was talking about with COVID and lockdown and all of that. So wonderfully illustrated lyrically. And this is a creature I would just, the music video. I hope she makes a music video for this song, because just looking at, you know, the image of her on the cover and everything, which already kind of, she's almost a bit like a mushroom. And then she's getting ready to dig. I can't wait to see if there's going to be a music video for it. I really need that. I would also love a music video for Victimhood. I feel like those are the two songs I could really use music videos for. The final track, however, is Her Mother's House. And this was the track that nearly made me cry. And it's hard to get a song to do that, especially, you know, like, I don't know, on first listen, I was taken somewhere. This is the melodic sort of, you know, kind of Björk I've been missing. And I think I wanted more from on Utopia that I just didn't feel was connecting the same way. This is a song where, you know, she takes out kind of knowing the grief and trauma of losing her mother, and she puts that in her heart, and she expounds upon having her daughter, carrying on her legacy, seeing herself in her daughter and vice versa, and what love really feels like, and compassion. And it's so wonderfully illustrated in the verses here. The space in your voice shows the scale of your compassion. The tone of your voice reveals the space you give others. And then her daughter, Isadora, joins her here. The more I love you, the more you love me. The stronger you become, the stronger I become. The less you need me and the less I need you. Björk sort of almost responds back in the verses. A dry voice comes from a stingy heart, but a moist voice comes from abundance. Can I get that quilted on a throw pillow stat? Thank you very much. One of my favorite lyrics on this record. In verse 3, when a mother's house has a room for each child, it's only describing the interior of her heart. The bridge is so interesting with this image here that's concocted. A balloon painted with red clay with lubrication will not crack, but will inflate, then float high. I mean, it's sort of, you don't know what's inside. It seems hard, like this hard shell. And you don't think that something that you would imagine is a, solid, heavy object could fly, but you don't know what's inside. And I think that that's a metaphor for the heart. The heart can become very hardened and the exterior very protected and shielded because of trauma and things that have happened. But it's still, inside this soft organism that is very fragile and light and searching for love and made of love and is a tool for love. And I think that's a beautiful way of describing the heart. And also the analogy of the house. I'm blown away. And then the vocalizations of her daughter matching with her. And it's also the symbolism of knowing it is her daughter. This isn't the only time a child of hers sings on this record. Her son, Sindri, who is actually a lot older than I originally thought. I thought Sindri was more my age, but he's actually 36. He was born long before the Sugar Cubes, actually. I was really shocked at how old he was. But anyway, he's on Ancestress, just in backing vocal. You kind of can't hear him. You just hear a bit of a male vocal in there in parts. But Isadora gets more, of a, duet with her mother here. And you can actually hear her kind of harmonizing and call and responsing in this, operatic fashion, and really kind of expressing the beauty of their voices and like mother, like daughter. I feel that symbiotic relationship sonically, emotionally. And then we have let me check if it's a clarinet or an oboe. Genius will tell me here. Because instrumentally, it sounds a lot more like an oboe. What's interesting is I'm not actually seeing it listed here. Well, whatever the woodwind is that comes and, harmonizes with them. If it is the oboe, I think that it is so stately and regal of a sound, and it definitely gives it a sort of, it gives it a little bit of a, Renaissance, era Europe kind of flair, like not Middle Ages, but a little post Middle Ages. Just a very kind of like old fashioned, European, sort of musicality that is so classic and regal and elegant and opulent, and anthemic and cinematic. And so the clarinet or the oboe here is this third presence that just weaves their vocals together and the melody so beautifully. I just can't handle it. I can't handle such a beautiful oboe. Really can't. I thought the flute was my favorite woodwind, but I think the oboe or clarinet might be. So well done. This is my favorite song on the record, and it is my favorite Björk song in a decade, for sure. Nothing on Volnicura or Utopia touches this song, or perhaps even several others on this record. I'm really impressed. To be honest with you, you never know what you're going to get when you go into a new Björk project. I mean, it's going to be different. It's going to be a challenge in some places to sort of sonically sink into, but this record is surprisingly easy for me to nestle into. I don't know. I don't know if it's the lack of Arca and the fact that she's, I don't want to say regressing to her older sounds, but it's just, some may say this is her weirdest album yet. And you could make that argument for every album she's made since Medulla. But it's almost to me like this album is closer to, I don't want to say closer to Earth. I mean, obviously it's very of the earth and it's trying to be organic. And it's also supernatural because, I still think of it as very ethereal. I think of meta, worlds that are more vibrant and sort of, the fungus and mushrooms are larger than life, and it's this sort of avatar world that conjures up to me. But I know that she's wanting this album to be very rooted in the world, in our world. But whereas Utopia was sort of like this fantasy of what would a utopia look like if we could make like a matriarchal sort of, you know, perfect society. But, you know, I don't know. This album feels more blissed out in some ways than Utopia, and yet it's very dark. And so it's the perfect representation. And like I said, the cover illustrates it perfectly. I'm at a loss. I'm really at a loss. I mean, so it's my favorite record of hers since, for sure, Biophilia, but perhaps since Medulla. It's tied with those records for me. And I think, honestly, it really is stronger than Biophilia, just because I think, you know, Biophilia was a little hollow in the, you know, sonic department. You know, I think this is her strongest record since Medulla, and by extension Vespertine, because Medulla is, you know, I like Medulla. I really love it, but I like Vespertine more. And there are ways in which this album connects more with Vespertine than Medulla. And like I said, you can hear glimmers of all of her other records in a way that I don't think you could in some ways on Utopia. Utopia was being its own thing. So yeah, I have nothing but praise. It'll be interesting to see how this album grows with me over time. You know, I felt like Utopia was a record that I was just so in love with when it came out because of the novelty of it. And it's sort of, there's some songs I'm always going to love, but over time, I've not been like wanting to listen to a lot of it so much. But this album, I'm hoping, is only going to, just as I become more familiar with it, just fit like a glove for me. I don't know. This album is special. And I am very much excited to see, I mean, she mentions, you know, if she made an album about trees compared to fungus and mushrooms, how different that would be in this Pitchfork video that she made. And now I'm just like, can she make a tree album? Please, can she make a tree album? Oh my God. I need her to do her Memory of Trees moment. Oh my God, that would be so epic. Maybe she will. I feel like this picking apart a different part of nature, exploring it, what she opened up on Biophilia, she's going to continue to do, metaphorically kind of expounding upon that for Love and Life. And it's her lane. So those are my thoughts. My favorite, obviously, Her Mother's House is my favorite track, followed right behind by Free Fall, followed right behind by Allow, followed right behind or tied with Ancestress. And I think the other one that would obviously clear the top 5 would be Fossora, the title track. Those 5 songs are just simply leagues above, I think, what she's put out in the last decade. My least favorite, yeah, I would say, I hate to say it, but Fungal City, just for me, is just, it's a little bit more kind of the meandering wailing we're accustomed to, you know, in her most recent work. But, you know, it doesn't mean I'm not skipping that song. This whole record feels like it needs to belong together. You can't omit any of the children that keep them together. They need to all be together. You can't skip a single song on this record. What can I say? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this body of work. I think it is stupendous. I think it is brilliant. I think it is beautiful. And, yeah, that's all I'm going to say, because I'm just going to start word vomiting. I already am. You know how I am. It's hard for me to articulate sometimes these things. I don't know, but let me know in the comments what your thoughts and experiences are with this record. What are your favorite songs? Are you impressed with it? Do you like the direction she's heading in? And I will see you all in my next video. Please subscribe if you are new here. And obviously a like if you enjoyed. And I will also link a playlist in the description where I have reviewed every single album of hers, so that'll be in the playlist, as well as, of course, the songs I already mentioned, the tracks, the singles that came out, that'll be linked there. And I also made a video about all her B-sides, her, you know, vinyl singles and stuff that never got on traditional albums. So all that Björk stuff. Also ranked every single Björk song on Tearmaker, which of course now needs to be updated, and one day I might do it, but you know, that'll be not in anywhere time soon, but that'll be all in the description. So have fun with that. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. I hope you enjoyed this video. Peace, love, and light. Warmth. Bye.